the caravans coming through and accumulating themselves at the southern border of United States. It is a big problem for the administration to deal with, and for the people also to consider that there is a whole bunch of people coming in a systematic way from Central American countries, particularly what we talk about the Northern Triangle, the countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And what I wanted to say is that we have to figure out how do we deal with this ongoing problem, which is not new, which has been an ongoing problem for some time, actually a few years. And most of it we know is people give reasons why they are coming in, why they are migrating to want to come to United States. And most of them are running away from violence, forced gang recruitment and extortion, and lastly, poverty and lack of opportunity. Now, the major problem in those countries is and has been violence, which has been created because of the civil wars during the 1980s, and although and that has left a legacy of violence and fragile institutions that deal with it. And they have been deemed to be the most violent countries in the world because of the civil wars and ongoing gang wars that have left thousands and thousands of people dead. For example, in El Salvador, 1979 through 92, 75,000 people have been reported to be killed. In Guatemala, through civil wars, 1960 through 1996, 200,000 people have been killed. In Honduras, although there has been no civil war per se, but what has happened is it became the staging ground for the U.S. backed Contras, and those were fighting Nicaragua's Sandinista government during the 1980s, and that whole this problem that has been created in these three countries has led to the breakdown of infrastructure, government control, and that has been taken advantage of by Mexican drug trafficking organizations, domestic organized crime groups, and also on top of that, transnational gangs. Those are what people talk about, the MS-13, M18. Those gangs have actually originated in California, but because they are transnational, they have taken advantage of the civil unrest and recruited more and more people. And there are local gangs, street gangs, which are called the Padillas. They all together have created an atmosphere of violence, gang recruitment, and extortion. And what has been estimated by the Council of Foreign Relations in 2015, these gangs extorted about $600 million from common people, from businesses, and even from the police to make sure that things are run or they are able to stay alive. So that's why there are these thousands and thousands of people, what some people call hordes of people, are trying to run away from it and come to the southern border of United States, and they want to seek asylum. Now, because this has been a continued problem, it has not originated yesterday. It has been dealt with by U.S. efforts by, for example, George Bush, even before George Bush. But I have notes about George Bush, who started what was called the Merida Initiative. Millennium Challenge Corporation was set up to provide aid to these countries. A Central American Regional Secure Initiative was started, which started by Obama administration, which was called the Alliance for Prosperity, A4P program, which was then taken over by Donald Trump and continued. But at the same time, what Donald Trump administration is doing is they are actually putting stricter controls on who can come in and who cannot. And they're also planning, and they have already done some of this, to cancel the temporary protected status of about 350,000 immigrants. The immigrants meaning the people who have come across and have sought asylum. Now, what happens is, in U.S. efforts in this process have roughly amounted about $200 million per year. Now, the problem with that is that most of it over the years has gone for funding helicopters, funding anti-drug programs, police, and small amounts of money have been provided for civil structures, providing school education for kids, or providing some kind of infrastructure support. And now, but the thing is that that has not been a major one. A major support has gone to police and fighting gangs. But what a lot of experts are saying is that more money should be given to these countries so that the infrastructure is built, so that the educational institutions are rebuilt, so that the kids stay in school and they are protected so that they don't get killed while going to school. Now, for that, you need a lot of money. You just don't need $200 million only. Now, another statistic, what comes out of that is, now because of these continued migrations, we have about 3.4 million people living in the United States from these three countries, and 55% of those are reported to be undocumented. So that means there are a lot of people who are in this country undocumented, who have run away from this violent place. And so the question is, what do you do with this? How do you stop it? And so I leave it to you now to come up with solutions. I have a few solutions, but I'm going to hold off to my solutions, and you can say something about it.
And all these undocumented immigrants that are here now, has there been anything done to see how well they are really getting and doing here in this country?
Now, that is a difficult thing to actually even to document. But there are people who say that the undocumented people who come in here, they actually provide an undercover economy, and a lot of people, these work in service industry and work in the cash economy, that's what people talk about, how they have created a second economy in the United States because they don't work through the normal channels. But they are, well, on the other hand, there are people who say, well, they are a big burden to the society, they're a drain on the economy, they do not contribute anything. So it's kind of a debate between the two sides there.
I see, because in talking to people about immigrants coming over recently, I was told, Margaret, 35 years from now, you need to look, because Americans are having fewer children, and our census will be going down. And we need that group to really continue our growth in this country. So that's the issue that I have been given, that we need, because these are the people who are coming in. They're doing the jobs that we may not have anyone able to do 35 years from now. We may not just have American citizens, because that growth has gotten low. So what are your thoughts about that?
That is a major question which the U.S. government, at the U.S. government level, people have to think through that. Because here again, you have to distinguish between the legal immigrants versus the people who really just want to run away from their native place because of violence. And at the same time, what U.S. government also has to make decisions about, policy decisions, is what kind of people do you want to allow to come in? Do you want to allow everybody to come in, or do you want to allow? Do you want to be selective in allowing people to come in. But you have to also look at this in the context of, I just wanted to make sure of this, that historically you have you have to view this, what we call, what Donald Trump talks about, the caravans coming across the southern border. You view this in context of the ships that came during 1940s loaded with Jewish people who were turned away and who ended up being dead because they were turned away. Now the question is, when you compare that with the people who are coming across the southern border, you turn them away, what is their future? They are also going to end up dead. Now, how do you balance those two? I don't know.
Well, there are a couple of other things that we need to look at. For example, right now, the people coming across the southern border are from Central America as a general rule.
Yes.
40 years ago, they were from Mexico. And there was a great deal of concern. All these Mexicans are coming and they're going to mess up our country, even though the Mexicans were here before the Northern Europeans were here. And we did solve that problem. We actually reduced the Mexican population in the United States because people went home. And how did we do it? We passed a law called NAFTA, which allowed companies to, instead of staying in the United States in order to get free movement of goods and services, to go to Mexico and to Canada. And what happened was the factories moved down there. Yes, Americans lost jobs, but the Mexicans could find good work down there and stayed there and built their family, and built their communities in Mexico, which meant that we didn't have the immigration issue. So one of the key factors that wasn't talked about at the time was to do something about the borders. Now, perhaps the answer that you're looking for is to try to do something like that in the Northern Triangle, which would mean that we would allow things, to allow companies to build their factories down there where the labor is very inexpensive. And people would now say, well, I have an opportunity. And because the companies, in order to make the investment, would have to have some security, whether it was their own or beefed up local security, then that would create an environment where somebody would be willing to have their kids grow up.
I mean that is the some kind of that kind of an answer I'm looking for, because instead of just giving them money, $200 million or $300 million, what I'm hoping is that the present government would actually like to talk to those Northern Triangle folk and devise a plan. How do you change the nature of this society in a way that they do not begin to run away? They don't run away. And if you can build some kind of infrastructure scheme so that they find jobs there, they have security there, the gangs are gone, it's going to take time. But that means there has to be dedicated investment to do that. Now, while we are talking about this, I just wanted to mention, which I just came to my mind, I just didn't remember to talk about this. There has been U.S. involvement in this in many ways, even before this problem came up. You remember we talked about banana republics. Banana republics are because of the banana companies which we start. Actually, there was a Boston company which eventually became the whatever the bananas.
Chiquita?
Chiquita, and there is another one.
Dole?
Dole, not Dole. There's
Dole, I thought was Hawaiian. I don't
yeah,
know
no,
that.
this became, it eventually became Chiquita. So, but that had a long history of exploitation in these countries. So they would actually fund groups so that the conditions would be good for them. And because of that, that has created a lot of issues in the society for the last, since 1900s. And so that has a long history. And so how do you prevent that from happening? That is exploitation of the native people right there. And so how does the government ensure that? I don't know what the answer is.
There's also a problem with the idea of our companies sending their manufacturing to those three countries. That again will be sending our jobs overseas. You know, basically, NAFTA was good because it kept the work in these Canada, U.S., and Mexico. What was a disaster was CAFTA, sending all. Once they looked at the Far East and saw that their salary was very low, hundreds, thousands of companies moved their manufacturing out there. People are mad at NAFTA, but they really should be mad at the sending the jobs over to the Far East. In addition to that, the CEOs, because they saw low prices, they in order to get the manufacturing done there, they gave away all of our technology. And that's what Trump is complaining about now, and he's trying to raise import duties on goods that companies are buying because they sent their manufacturing over there. So the real problem the problem that I see is that the CEOs basically have sold out the United States by sending all of our technology to the Far East, and now we're complaining that they have our technology. They stole our technology because the CEOs gave it to them.
Actually, we've got a very poor view. Your view of the CEOs of multinational corporations assumes that they're Americans and should have America at heart when they make decisions. The fact of the matter is they're not. Multinational corporations are multinational corporations. They are not, even if their headquarters happens to be in New York or Delaware like everybody else, their responsibilities are not to the host nation, but to their stockholders, and their major stockholders at that. And they're not evil. They're doing what they're supposed to do, which is to maximize the return on investment.
Yes, and that's why the government has the responsibility of setting the limits of what they can do.
That I totally agree, but we're not doing that. That is really, it's a separate discussion.
No,
but
it's not a separate discussion. It's fundamental to our to the whole thing.
For the integrity of the program, to overall success of the program should include protecting the technology that we originate here, and at the same time be able to protect the southern border, because you cannot have millions of people walk across the border. I mean, that's a real thing. We got to think about that. Although we can be compassionate, we can be all giving, but at the same time, you also have to think about how do you decide about the millions who want to cross over because they're running away from the place they were born in, and because of the violence. I mean, that's kind of thing. I don't know how to fix that.
Right. That's why they're coming.
Yes.
And once they get here, and they are basically undocumented and subject to INS, which will send them back. So
they're also subject to local employers,
Yeah.
because these people are not just sitting there
No. No.
absorbing food out of the atmosphere. They're working.
Yes.
They're paying their way in large measure. A part of the problem that we find is because they're working, they're doing jobs that possibly an American might do, although in many cases they don't. And they're not being paid for their labor any reasonable amount. They are, in some cases, virtual slavery because if they say or do anything that the employer doesn't like, he just turns them into the INS and they're gone. And human trafficking, in many cases, operates the same way.
Now, I'm curious about our president. Does he have businesses outside of this country?
Yes.
And where, can you tell me where they're located?
One off the top of my head is Scotland. He has a golf course there. He has hotels in a variety of different places. He desperately wanted, and possibly still does, wanted to have a building in
Russia.
in Moscow.
Okay.
But he has businesses throughout the world, or at least he's licensed his name, which is
And
more
before
often the
he
case.
became president, he went over to his businesses.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's good to know because I would think that we would encourage people and businesses. If we encourage our people to go outside this country to establish businesses, we should encourage people to come here also. And the idea that the immigrants have taken up so much space is really bothersome because now it's to the point where we are being educated and trained to hate the immigrants or people who are coming over and not documented. Their thinking is, how do they come over and get documented because they want to become citizens?
We do what we can to discourage it.
Yes.
Because for a variety of reasons. By the way, the statistics that you were quoting, there's, what did you say, about 2.5, 3 million people from that area.
Yes.
There's supposedly
3.4
somewhere about
in 2015.
30 million undocumented
Undocumented at
people
the
in the
moment.
United States. The vast majority of came into this country legally and just stayed instead of going home. So if we get rid of the people from the Northern Triangle, we haven't solved the problem if the problem is undocumented people, illegal immigration. Another thing to be aware of, when these people come to the border or cross it, when they turn themselves into the INS, which is what these people are doing, that is legal. That is how they're supposed to do it under U.S. law. So they are not illegal. They're undocumented, but they are attempting to follow U.S. law
Yes.
to do this, and they are treated as if they were illegal. And so a lot of the things, for example, the idea of separating the children, making sure that people know you're bringing your kids here, well, you'll lose them and you'll never see them again. That is illegal because the undocumented person being treated as if he were illegal and he's not.
Yes. Now, aren't we all immigrants?
Yes.
Not all.
No.
Well, you got to define immigrants, but
Yeah, Native Americans are.
No.
well, Native Americans came from Asia, so
Yeah, well, that was before there were any laws.
that's not clear.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you ask me, it is kind of open question who is an immigrant. We are all immigrants, but we have different classes. I mean, if you look at, for example, people who came, let us say, in the Mayflower,
Yes.
Not
many.
Not many. And then people who came were brought along later and sold in along the south.
Slavery, and
And
that's-
they didn't
that's-
come voluntarily.
No, they did
They
not.
did not. And are they immigrants? No.
am
They
an
were brought here.
Okay, so since I'm ancestors from
Yeah.
those who were brought here as slavery, I'm not an immigrant.
So you're not an immigrant in that
I
sense.
see.
So you have more, I guess, from my standpoint, you have more right to be here than the master who brought them, the ancestors, because you have a claim.
Yes.
You have a
Yes.
claim. And in comparison, Native Americans came long time ago. They also came from Asia. But at that time, of course, we don't know whether they were laws or not. You claim they were, but I don't know.
Every society has
something.
laws of some form or another.
But at the same time, you see that when you look at the immigration question, it is very complicated. Now, at the same time, you also had a time when you had not you, I mean the government were recruiting people to send them out west so they could occupy the land, the Indian land,
Yes.
and pitch not a tent, I guess, dugouts, and have a homestead. If they survived 1 year with their Indian people wars and stuff, they got that piece of land. Although they may have come undocumented, I don't know whether they really came as documented people at that time.
No, immigration in the 1800s,
Yes.
early 1800s particularly,
That was 1800s. Yes.
was basically you came over on the ship
Yes.
and you found your way. Later, the rules were that you had to have a sponsor.
But that's
So-
late. That's later.
Right. Well, I know in the
Late
case of my
1800s,
grandparents.
1900s.
Yeah. They had a sponsor. There was some guy who said, I will take care of you.
Yes.
I will find you a place to live. I'll find you a job, and you'll pay me back.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is the same rules that the coyote, the people who
They do the same thing.
escort the
Yes.
people from across the southern border, have the same rules.
Yes.
And in some cases, the same results. The garment district
Yes.
in New York City was populated by people who
Came like
were
that.
told, you're working there.
I mean, there is actually, it's interesting. They do excuse me, in the garment district, they have a museum. I don't know whether you have seen this. But
I haven't seen that. I've heard of it.
I saw a documentary on that, and that is really educational. That you can't believe that it's a small room, and they say that 20 people used to live in there, and children were knitting, children were doing garment work, and in that cramped area, because everybody had to work, and they were brought in, and they had to pay somebody, and it took a long time before they kind of could get out of that. And so you had cramped quarters, and that is what then, because of some of those quarters burned down, that is what led to the change in fire protection rules, and that is how we got unions. And actually, that's an interesting study there.
Yes.
And protection of garment workers. And at that time, a lot of people were killed in a big fire. I forgot which fire that was.
I don't remember.
It's a historic fire in that district.
Historically, my grandfather was a house painter
Okay.
in the early 1900s. And he was a big man, physically big man for his time. And they were attempting to unionize house painters.
Okay.
And the contractors, the employers, were beating up and killing the union organizers
Wow.
by gangs.
Of course.
Who eventually became the mafia, although in this case it was the Jewish gangs. My grandfather happened to be, because he was working, a counterforce.
Oh, I see.
He was very well known as a tough, and he protected the union organizers, among other things.
So he became a soldier in that thing? Is that what
I
it
don't
is?
know. He was what I know of him. He was quite a character.
I see. Okay.
Now, what I'm concerned about, though, right now, is our focus on the southern borders and immigrants. It bothers me a great deal, particularly when some children come over. Uh, the parents say the parents were sent back right away. The children are still here. It means that these children that were coming over will not know their parents many, many times. And they will be discussed negatively. And when they grow up, they will hate America for what is done to them.
Possibly. Yes.
I mean, you have a president to that. In fact, you had Native American children taken away by the and placed in foster homes in Catholic Church or other churches because they wanted to what is it called, civilize them.
Yes.
And they actually, of course, they hate you hear their stories.
Yeah.
They are heart-wrenching stories, actually. And so that's a similar thing there. But at the same time, you also have to recognize, we have to recognize actually that if you are separating the parents from the children, and children are released in the population, they become undocumented and they have no support, and we have no way. Actually, there's recent reports where the government had no way to find out where they are. And so how do you deal with them? How do you educate them? How do you make sure that they become part of a civil society that is good enough to let them grow and contribute to the well-being of United States?
It's kind of a perverse opinion,
Okay.
but when they finally figure out who these children are and where their parents were sent back, they will then send back those children to the town where they came from, whether or not their parents are still alive.
Oh, is that a plan?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
The other thing is that the people who come and seek asylum, they are met at the border, recorded, and told to go back to Mexico until their case arrives in court, which may be a couple of years.
If then. There's no reason
There's no
why
court date.
the current administration would ever want to bring the case up.
Yes.
It costs a lot of money. The people aren't here anymore. It's not our problem. Mexico will deal with it. We're not even, as far as I can tell, paying Mexico to house these people. So at some point, Mexico is going to say, forget it. We're not taking them back.
And do we also focus as much on the northern borders as we do on the southern borders?
Not yet.
How come?
Because they're good people. And
Who's good people?
they look like us.
They look like whom?
Whoever crosses over that side.
I'm a Semite, you're Italian, you're African American, you're Indian.
Yes.
They don't look like any of us.
That's the end of that. That's the end of that.
Okay.
And by the way, I said not yet because if you look at the automobile industry, most of the automobile industry is in Canada. And at some point, somebody is going to say, oh, look at all these jobs. We got to bring all these jobs back. Windsor is across the lake. Actually, it's a bridge. And we can't have that anymore. So if you can get rid of one group, you can get rid of another. There's a poem that gets quoted a lot. You know, when they came for the Jews, I didn't care because I'm not Jewish, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for another group, and I didn't care. And when they finally came for me, there was nobody else to speak. It's got to be stopped now because democracy is a wonderful thing, but it's awful hard work. Hitler was democratically elected, and most of the things that he did in Germany were approved by the legislature. So it was lawful. And if you look at some of the things that
Did you
excuse
say
me,
awful or lawful?
lawful and awful, but awful it depends on which side of it you were on. But lawful
Yeah.
is fact.
I mean, isn't it so sad that democracy can do this to people? And it's real. It's not just. It's not only awful. It is real that it does happen,
Now,
and it can continue to happen.
Yes.
Are we practicing democracy now?
Well,
Well, the basis of
We are a
democracy
republic.
is
I know, but are we practicing?
well,
Democracy
depends on
now.
how you define that. If you
free communication is the basis of democracy.
I see.
And for the time being, there's
are.
no policeman at the door suggesting that we shut our faces.
I mean, what is interesting about this? I just wanted to mention this, that most of the rhetoric dealing with this southern border has concentrated from the higher ups. Talk about the MS-13 gang, and I mentioned it in the beginning that MS-13 gang and M18 gang, they are actually transnational gangs which originated in California, and they have taken advantage of the situation. They are making money. Because they want to make money, they are killing each other right there and in California.
Yes.
But they are not bringing people. I don't see any evidence from the literature there that there are actually MS-13 gang members coming along along with those people.
I wouldn't be surprised, but it'd be more likely that they come in by airplane.
Yeah, they might, because they have a lot of money. They would not walk with them. Why would you walk thousands of miles, starve to death, and then walk across as an MS-13 gang member?
Right. And the same thing to do with the Middle Eastern terrorists who you were talking about when you were in your opening. It makes no sense if you've got a specific job to do at a specific time to come in with a busload of people and maybe not make it
No.
for a variety of reasons. You can't afford it when I can fly in with a false document, or maybe not even a false
A
document,
real document.
and I could get here. And once I'm here, I disappear into the population. I do my thing, but kind of like 9/11, all of those people who participated in the hijacking were here legally.
And they are from our friendly country,
Yes, in most
Saudi
cases.
Arabia.
Yeah.
Most of them are Saudis, and we are brotherly love with them. So I don't know what the deal is, but that is what how foreign policies are made.
Right.
By the way, I want to make one other point. The caravan, this whole idea of a caravan.
The idea of the caravan is there.
It is a modern innovation. It used to be that a coyote, a guide, would recruit 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people and help them get across the border, et cetera, et cetera. And he did all kinds of things because he could.
Yeah, he
He was the only one. The idea of the caravan was to get a large number of people together so that they could protect themselves from. Now, it's not perfect. There is still problems, but it's better than it was.
I mean, that is true, but at the same time, what people have now said is it is actually George Soros and his cohorts providing money to these people so that they can walk across. I mean, which is kind of ridiculous. If George Soros is giving money, is he giving money to all these people to walk across Hungary through all this heat and cold with no shoes, and then come over here? I mean, this is kind of preposterous that George Soros would fund all that, and the liberals along with him.
It's definitely the liberals. George Soros is the worst of the liberals because you didn't know it, but he was a Nazi.
Yeah, that's another thing they bring up. He is a Nazi. He was a Nazi. No, That's another thing. He's Jewish. Well, that's kind of
Well,
Yeah.
that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But he was a Nazi, and he's now supporting all this because he's part of the liberal gang, and he's supporting other gangs to come over, which is kind of I kind of find that amusing, but it's not amusing when you look at the broader picture of how the rhetoric is built up to oppose all this. What I would like to see is a coherent approach to deal with the situation. For example, you need more judges to go to adjudicate the cases. You need more ability to fund the local governments so that they can stand up and do things.
Well, I think a key thing of improving conditions on the ground in the Northern Triangle is, and this takes time. It doesn't happen, I'll give you $1,000
No.
and the problem goes away. To stabilize the situation, make sure there's work, make sure that there's order so that people aren't afraid to leave their homes or even be in their homes.
Be in their home. That's another problem which these articles talk about.
And you can't have a police force that may be very effective, but their own gang. You need to build, and it takes time, to build an idea of what a society is supposed to be and what each individual's place in that society could be. By the way, I've just defined fascism. But democracy depends purely, very much on everybody accepting that there are norms and that everybody has rights to survive and have minimum levels of education, protection, etc.
But this is not being accepted. So, did we lose our democracy because of the so much anger that we have now related to the immigrants coming here? We have, like discussed, we have had immigrants all over, and I find for the last several years the anger has been so much until we go out, we can never have a discussion about anything but the immigrants and the wall that's being built and that kind of things. And I would like to see some changes. I support the idea that there are people that come to this country because they can't live in their country for some reason. They like the idea that perhaps some of their ancestors had come here many years ago and they like the idea of this country. I support that idea, but I don't support the anger that we seem to be displaying here in this country right now.
Well, it's also not, well, the anger is also not new. It has always been the othering is an important contribution of human behavior. That you can easily other the other party, and as long as a bunch of people get together, you have another person to blame. And what happens in what I see different there is that as long as the people in who sit in positions of authority, as long as they contribute to that othering, the situation becomes worse. If, for example, I will give you an example. When we had 9/11, George Bush, one of the noble things he did, it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
One of the noble things he did is that next day or whatever days, a few days later, he went to address a bunch of people in a mosque in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So that kind of deflected the whatever the problem, the anger was in a certain way, but it didn't kill the anger. But at least at his position, he could show that we don't have to other the other party. We have to deal with the enemy, not the people who somehow happen to be the same, share the same religion. So that is where the difference lies. And as long as we have people in authority joining in that othering piece. Oh, there are good people on both sides. That we have a problem.
I
there.
understand what he was supposedly trying to say, but he missed the point that the good people might have been standing along the side.
Yes.
The people who were marching,
Yes.
who were attacking, were neo-Nazis.
I mean, they had slogans.
Yeah.
They had slogans. How more explicit slogan can you have?
I totally agree, and we can have another conversation on that. But if to deal with this particular issue of the southern border, some of it is othering.
Yes.
We have blamed the Latino for much of the problems in America.
Yes.
If it's not a Latino, it's got to be a Muslim. There are no other bad people in the world. That's sarcasm, Catherine.
Yes, it's sarcasm because right now the newspapers are going with different ethnic groups. We have this many Latinos, we have this many African Americans, we have this many, and so we have a diverse community, but the other group is dying down. So they're a little bit afraid of that.
I would actually say that the politicians should be happy that there is diversity, because they can continue doing this identity politics, which they do actually even now.
Yes.
I mean, you have politicians go and speak with the Hispanic group. You have politicians go jump into the black churches. You have politicians go and talk about in front of NRA. I mean, you have this this dynamic that they play, and more diverse. They go and actually another thing, they go and play to the Cuban group in Miami to secure the Miami vote. But you have this. So politicians should be happy that there are these diverse groups who they can actually secure. Actually, Trump did another thing for Indians. Which is kind of interesting.
Okay, this I haven't heard.
He had a fundraiser with Indian group, and he says a whole bunch of Indians were very happy with that, and so there was a huge group saying that it's either Trump or nobody else.
Okay.
So that is kind of interesting thing that he did play that.
Yes, yes.
And so I kind of would say that other politicians also should be happy with it.
Yeah. As far as the problem with others, you know, it's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And you know, as an example, right here in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan still
Yes.
exists.
Oh, yes.
Need I say more? But I mean,
And they have been signing
yeah.
things lately.
When I got out of college, I went to work for Boeing and as an engineer, and people in Boeing, people from Washington, were complaining about the influx of Northern European engineers.
Is that right?
You know,
Wow.
white as this paper.
Yeah.
You know? But there were too many of them. They were
Wow.
from England. They were from Norway. They were from Sweden. My God, what are we doing? You know, even though those were the predominant population of the group to begin with.
Wow.
So they were, you know, complaining about their own people, you know, their own ethnic.
I mean,
people coming over.
Historically, in the United States, the first group that was othered in after the founding of the nation was the Germans, because the Hessians had been mercenaries and fought against the patriots, the revolutionaries, and so they wanted them out. In the 1860s, the Chinese were imported to come in and help build the western portion of the railroad. The Irish were brought in to build the eastern portion.
part.
California, as soon as that railroad was done, passed and tried to enforce the Chinese Exclusion Act. Get them out of here. You know, they did their job. we, mankind, and probably any species, has a form of xenophobia. It's a protection. If it's different, it may not be good for you. But civilization is expanding the concept of family to understand that if somebody looks different, acts different, speaks different, whatever, that they could still be part of your family. But it's a very tenuous thing. Yugoslavia was a very successful country in Europe. It was successful because they had a dictator who held his thumb down on everybody, but he basically treated everybody the same. Possibly not good, but the same. And when he went away, the politicians that you were talking about said, remember that 60 years ago we hated them? Pick who them was. And he was able to regenerate the xenophobia that had been missing. The families were, you married who you married. It wasn't because they were the same as your grandfather or your cousin or something, because you liked them. Well, he managed to screw that up. And now Yugoslavia has gone back into the dark ages.
Broken up. I mean, there's
It's three different countries.
Yes.
And none of them are all that successful.
Yes, of course, that's the problem. I mean, you have also the recent history. You have Turkey, for example. You have Armenians living in Turkey.
Right.
And that
100 years ago, they did a job on them.
They did a job on them, and they even now they don't accept that they did a job on them. So, but what do? That's what othering comes up, and even in where I was born, we had the same problem that they said either you convert, you get killed, or you run away. So people ran away, or some of them got killed too. So all my parents had to run away. My relatives and my wife's, everybody had to run away. Otherwise, they would have been dead. But although we all looked the same, which is kind of interesting, only difference was slight difference in religion. But what can you do? That's othering is easy. But even this, it's a major problem here as well. So I don't know what the solution is.
I don't know. One of the things that religion was supposed to do was to expand the idea of family. And that's a good thing, but then again, if you're not part of that family, hopefully you accept that that maybe the other guy's wrong, but he's not evil.
But this is interesting that you bring that up. If you listen to the so-called evangelicals, they have a discussion, are Catholics really Christians? They declare right there and say, no, Catholics are not Christians.
Even though it is the religion that Christ founded.
But that's beside the point to them. I mean, I was amazed that they say this.
That's because I'm a Catholic and I don't think they are Christians.
So it's although all are, I mean, it's kind of. I thought that was interesting that all of these groups believe in the divinity of Christ. And what happened?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think that's a different point. My point is that the evangelicals are not following the words of Christ.
Okay.
They say they're Christians,
Yes.
but they don't follow Christ. They follow some other ideas.
Okay.
And Christ was very specific, and about what to do, how you should behave in order to get to heaven. And
So, see right there, you have although one group, and right away you got issues there. I mean, that's why it would be ideal as human beings to create a society where people actually understand that although we are different, we can still live as human beings. Although we disagree, we shouldn't sit down and kill each other.
I
Or what?
I accept that philosophy because that's my philosophy. We can disagree all we
Yeah.
want to and not accept some of the things
Yes.
that you hear. But by the end, we should respect and continue to know that we are all human beings and that we want this world to continue. At least I want this world to continue and this country to continue without so much anger displayed on a daily basis.
Well, that the anger stems from a lot of it stems from when two people have different ideas. One of them is right and the other one is wrong, and it's the ego saying I'm right and you're wrong, or you saying you're right and I'm wrong. And
What if they both are partially right?
Or neither is right.
Or neither is right.
which is more likely the case.
But as Paul pointed out, ego prevents from accepting that again, because if you follow the normal curve, you follow a whole bunch of varied opinions. You ought to be able to accept all that. Disagree, but you got to allow people to have that opinion.
There's more to it
agree
than
to disagree.
Agree or disagree. Yeah.
there's more to it than that. A lot of times people justify it's okay, this person should be allowed to survive because we're all the same. Well, we're not all the
No,
same.
we're not
No,
all the same.
And that's a good thing,
Yes.
not a bad thing. The very nature of the fact that we're different means we have different experiences. We understand things differently. We may or may not be more right or less right or whatever, but we have a better chance of getting there when you see things from a variety of different points of view.
Exactly.
And oh, by the way, there's another factor. If everybody's the same, then there's four of us here.
Yeah.
We don't need four.
Can
Three,
just have one.
you're gone.
Yes.
Forget it. Because and if I don't make it, well, then grab somebody else. The difference is the value,
Yes.
and that's critical to everybody's survival.
Oh, yes.
So coming,
And this group is a diverse group.
it is a
Yes.
diverse group. And
Yes.
coming to the close of this argument, what is your solution? I will let everybody give a solution to the problem. Do you have a solution?
Why don't you start?
No, then I will say something in the end.
My solution is that you have to, and it will have to be a non-governmental group for practical reasons, go down and provide a stabilizing thing in small communities in the Northern Triangle and expand as it becomes successful, and they have to come with jobs. They have to come with something that people are willing to take a risk in order to participate.
What?
So that's
Oh, wow.
How about you?
I violently disagree with that.
Oh.
What about a mother and two children? The mother doesn't have a job. She just has the two children. And if she stays, she gets killed, along with her kids.
But
So-
her mother stayed. That's how she got there, and her father stayed.
Yeah, but the situation in the country is right now very much different than it
So,
was
but what
No,
would
I
your
understand,
solution?
but-
years
What,
ago.
what would your
Yeah.
solution be then?
Are we simply trying to find the solution
Yeah,
of
to that.
immigrants?
To that, no, to that this
Because-
problem, southern border problem. Next 10 seconds.
We allow them to come in. Let's say there's 3.6 million. We have 3,600 counties
Yes.
in the United States. That's 1,000 people per county. A representative represents 750,000. So 750 to 1 is the ratio.
That's I didn't think of. That's great math there, right there. That's a
So-
good solution there.
And it's, right now it's not 3.6, it's less than 3.6, but that's, And when Trump says we can't absorb, for every 750 people we have, we can't absorb one more.
It's not true.
It's not true. But
And
what about you?
Well,